Hello again and welcome to another installment of Compelling Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Ramerini, the founder and chief visionary officer of Compel CEOs, and we are coming to you today from the Inspirant studio at Brytech, who has been with me since about 2000 as a member in one of our board groups. Today, we're honored to have with us as our featured podcaster, Natalie McVeigh. Natalie is well recognized in the industry of family business coaching and consulting and training. She's an executive and entrepreneurial coach, and she's also a practitioner in neuroscience, specializing in CIQ, or conversational intelligence. She has expertise in complex conflict resolution, specializing in interest-based negotiations, which she was trained for at Harvard Law School's program on negotiations. Natalie is also a fellow and faculty member of the Family Firm Institute, as well as at the faculty of NYBA Trust School, where she specializes in family dynamics. She has literally worked with companies throughout the United States in various stages of transition or dispute resolution. She's the vice chairperson of the Purposeful Planning Institute's Council of Deans and serves on the Education Development Committee. Natalie is a certified happiness trainer and has an expertise in building and developing cohesive teams through utilizing assessments and creating training curricula. And she's currently finishing her Ph.D. in applied psychophysiology. So welcome, Natalie. It's a pleasure to have you. And thank you for being our guest. So let's get right into it. In your experience, what do you feel is the most important ingredient for a family business to succeed in their succession plan?
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. I would say that the main thing is honesty. And I know that's going to sound really trite and silly and easy to get, but there's a way that we aren't honest with people because we don't want to hurt their feelings. We're afraid to say the thing. We know how they're going to react. We know it'll make things worse. And so we tend to tell these little white lies. Like, I like that outfit you picked out when I don't. And, those little lies build on each other when it comes to succession, right? I think you're amazing at networking, even though I know and you know that you're uncomfortable doing it. You leave very early. You don't send up follow-up meetings. What I might have meant to say is, I really like when you come to the networking meetings. I think it's important that people get to know you, but here are the ways that you could improve. And so the truth is, we need to tell people our feedback early. Feedback is a gift, and it might come off harsh at first, although there are ways to correct it from coming off harshly. But it really is a gift. At the end of the day, if I have a coffee stain on my shirt and you don't tell me at our meeting that we're having because you don't want to embarrass me, and I go for a job interview right after and I don't get the job, you haven't helped me. You've hurt me. And too many of us are walking around with that metaphorical coffee stain that doesn't matter yet because we have time to address it. But 10 years, 20 years, 30 years will pass by too quickly, and it becomes hard to say something later.
So Natalie was in today to speak to one of our board groups, and we covered a lot of information, so much so that the group didn't want her to stop. But what occurred to me was, following up on what you were just talking about, there seems to be a severe lack of good, open, honest, and early communications.
hmm
Is there a roadmap for family businesses to follow? And if there is, when do they take it out and discuss it, so to speak?
Yeah, I like to gamify learning because games are silly, right? Before the pandemic actually happened, there's this great collaborative game called Pandemic. And you actually each get a card. You're the researcher, or you're the transportation specialist, or you're the doctor, or whatever it is. And I actually hand the cards down face up to each person. You can see them. What usually happens, though, is everyone picks up the card this is the only collaborative game. Most games are competitive, but we are competitive in our families. And I become the smart one, or I become the talkative one, or I become the funny one. And so everyone picks up the card and they hold it against their chest. And they'll start losing. The game, if you don't work together, actually means that you're starting to lose. And then at some point in time, someone will grab everyone's cards and say, remember, she handed them down so we can look at them, instead of asking to share. So, the easiest way to start these feedback conversations early and often are about silly things, about that game that we play poorly, like the person who rips it out of your hands. You can say, yeah, Steve, you could have asked me for the card. And Steve, likely you've done the same thing with work assignments. You have taken the assignment from me because I wasn't doing well, but I didn't know why. And so, games, spending time together, whether it's golf or all of those things, help you start talking about the stupid stuff first. If you don't like someone who's chewing with their mouth open, I'm not asking you to nag your family members, but I am asking you, the moment that something is creating a division, to just talk about it and not make it a blaming way. So for me, I'm a little slow. I send things late because I want to get it done right. I have people who tell me now, they say, I know you get things done well and it's great. It just causes me some anxiety. Could you send it to me a day earlier so I don't feel like I'm left out? And that's not hard for me. And it shouldn't be hard for you to articulate. So I think the easiest way is to do it with silly stuff that shouldn't matter, and work up to those harder conversations as they come that feel more scary.
So in Compel, we have many generational businesses, some of whom have sons and daughters in our Next Gen program. They're obviously at this point 25 plus years of age. How early do you think the conversation should begin about the family business and the potential of coming into the business and maybe carrying it on to another generation?
If you can talk, you can learn. So we should be talking about these things as early as 4 years old, sometimes with a grandma and grandpa camp, of bringing people into the business, engaging with it in ways you can understand. I don't think you should have them looking at a P&L at that age. That's weird. Um, but you want age appropriate learning that engages with the family, allows it to be an option, not the only option. And when you say there are certain standards, like certain educational requirements or certain training requirements, or we call them comportment, ways that you behave yourself in the business, those are age appropriately communicated so we can work towards them. And same thing, when we start getting into the company, it may be that your name gets you in the door, but you have to perform these certain things first. I have some clients that don't let you come back into the company until you've been fired first, because they love that you test your boundaries. So whatever those tasks are, you want to communicate them in a way that makes sense all the way through. So you're not randomly surprising someone with a rule that they didn't know existed when that was their hope and dream, or feedback that they weren't expecting when they spent all this time trying to become the person that would be able to get into the business if that was their goal. And also saying it's okay if you don't. We tend to equate engagement in the family company as the only thing that's important in the family. And strong families can build strong businesses, but I've never seen a strong business build a strong family. It's not to say that the business doesn't create wealth for the family and all these other things, but you're just as much a member of the family if you don't come in the business. That makes sure we get the right talent in and not just everyone showing up because they expect to.
So I've been doing this work now for 25 years. And as I was discussing with you, some of the members in my groups have been with me for 20 years, and their children are now participating in our Next Gen group. So I've literally known these young adults since they were very, very small. And I doubt that any of them had conversations as early as 4 years old. I get the sense that they might have started to have conversations in their teens, as they were exiting high school maybe and trying to figure out where they're going to go to college. And it was probably more around, well, how was your day today? And what happened at the company today? Some of them, yes, I know, worked at the company from the time they were 12, 13 years old and whatnot, but very, very few from what I'm seeing. What do you think is like the appropriate age to ask a child, do you want to be involved in the family business?
I think you can always ask and know that the question is going to change. I love internships for high schoolers. I love the idea, even if you're just sweeping up the floor. Also, internships when you're in college that might match what you might be majoring in. If you're majoring in business, maybe you get an office job. If you're majoring in marketing, you sit in maybe the marketing department. But children change their major. Children decide to, we've even seen some, I think one of your members was sharing that story today, went to medical school, didn't like being a doctor, did something else. Asking is okay, and setting up expectations that if they want to come, these are the things they should do. Holding on to it tightly, not so much. What we don't want to do is have undue pressure on our children that they think they're going to disappoint you if they don't take on the family business. We always joke that it's the third child or the mistress, either one, right? You spend more time with the business than your wife, and more time with the business than maybe your kids that are at home. And what we don't want is your adult children thinking that the only way to get your affection and approval is to do the business, because you have many options. And the best thing for the business is making sure the appropriate people are running it. And the best thing for your children is making sure they're using their talents for what makes them successful. That's why you started your company. You were really good at it. You love it. You can't stop spending time with it. And wouldn't you like that for your kids too?
So it's interesting. As I mentioned, we have several members whose children are now in our next gen group and working diligently on taking over their family business. What I've discovered, and this is anecdotal, is the parents that were most vehemently opposed to having their kids come in the business are the ones where their kids are now running the business.
Yeah. It's true. This is why I think best practices are problematic, is you say my kids are never going to run the business they come in. You say my kids must do it, and those are the kids that leave. There's something called individuation, which is a process that happens roughly between the ages of 16 and 35, where I'm trying to focus on creating my own mark, making my own space in the world, coming out from the shadow of my parents. And especially with entrepreneur parents, that shadow is really big and large. And sometimes all I can do is just say no to whatever you're saying. And so I think that's the fallacy of when we tell our kids what we want for them or desire for them, they don't know how to navigate it effectively. And at the end of the day, our children surprise us. Who they will become is not who we see them, because we're too close to them to see them objectively. So I think any hard and fast rules, especially when your kids are young, is a mistake. But leaving up the opportunity and making sure that the pathway is predictable for them to follow and doesn't feel penalizing. Like if I didn't know that you require a degree to join the company, we've never talked about that, and I've told you I'm going to go to technical school, or that traditional school doesn't work for me, and then 5 years down the road I apply for a job and you say, yeah, but you don't have a degree. That would have been helpful to know early on, if I wanted to choose that pathway. And so that's the piece of saying, hey, would you like to join the company? This is how I think about my employees. And then I can behave as the heir however I need to match that.
Yeah, we've obviously had through the years any number of generational businesses, and we're starting to see them transition over. But one story which I'll share with you, which sticks out in my mind, is a longtime member who recently, took a leave. He was holding out hope that one of his children, or possibly their spouses, would be interested in coming in and running the business. And neither one was, and their spouses weren't interested either. Basically, he has two children and two in-laws, and they all have their own business, but it's not his business. And that kind of forced him to develop a really strong number two, because his children were a little bit younger than, he had them a little bit later on in life. So have you seen instances where, the delay of having the children, the next generation come in, has fostered strong management teams to be built?
Yeah, you want to run the business. We don't think of people and when we think about bench strength and succession. It's the hardest thing when I have clients write job descriptions is to think about the profile of the person in the role and not the person, whether it's Joe or Steve or Johnny or Janie. And that should be the way that you're running the business, with or without your kids. It's great if your kids join. If they don't, wonderful. It also opens opportunities to potentially have a sale to your management team or a sale to the outside world with a strong management team or a company that your kids are just owners in, where they use a board of directors to manage the company with those outside people. The rules of the business are the same with bench strength, with succession planning, with building in redundancy, with or without your kids. The challenge we have when we think about our kids is we're sometimes holding that number two spot for them. Your kids know it, we know it, and sometimes because we want to see it so well, we create our kids to be less successful than they need to be to get in that role because they know it's there for them. They should still be working for that role. Their name and their lineage should only be part of the question, not the only part. And, it takes long enough to become a CEO. EY did a study, I believe, that said the average age of a successor is 47. So if you have your children late in life, you're probably going to have a non-family CEO for some amount of time. There are companies that do that. They come in, they want to be mentor non-family CEOs. So it's really helpful to say, here's the role, here's the bench strength I need, and it allows all the options: internal family succession, family ownership with non-family management, a sale as an ESOP or a sale to the management company, or an external sale, as long as the business is working the way it should.
So you've worked with hundreds of companies at
Yes.
this point. What have you seen that is the most difficult challenge or situation for family businesses to overcome?
I think it's the taboo. Entrepreneurs can be tough. We talked about that today. Everyone joked about their own rebellion. A lot of people in the room were saying that they were entrepreneurs who couldn't find themselves jobs. And that's true. Entrepreneurs can be gregarious, they can be charismatic, they can be extroverted, they can get people to follow them. But if you think about that rebellious spirit, that my way or the highway spirit, and you say, would that make me a good parent and a good spouse? Sometimes not. And so the hardest part is to talk about those things as true. So I'm working with this family now, and they really revere the founder entrepreneur who's now passed, but they have a hard time talking about some of his more challenging pieces because they want to revere him. And the same is true for my kids. I love my kids so much that I don't want to have a feedback conversation that accidentally hurts them. So all those things you're not talking about are the things that come to the problem. Yes, you can see me on the happiness and coach training side, and that's lovely, but I see a lot of families on the mediation side that all they say is, gosh, if we'd had this conversation 10 years ago, we'd be in a very different place. We are sometimes intentionally not having difficult conversations that are designing a more difficult future. I had one client tell me that his estate plan was a little unfair. And I said, what'll happen when you die? And he goes, well, if I die. And I said, well, John, you're going to die. And he says, okay, if I die, I think my kids are going to fight. And I said, but you told me you don't want your kids to fight. And he's like, yeah. And I said, so why are you doing this? He's like, well, I won't have to see it.
I have a few of those too, that the older generation, even as their children approach 60, don't want to set things in stone, let's say, for, the future. It's like, it'll be up to you two to dissolve or to resolve or to fix or to whatever. And that's not a plan. That's like washing your hands of the whole thing.
It's not a plan and it's not practical. We have pretty good conflict skills in life, but we're used to using them at work. We almost never work them out with our siblings because mom and dad play mediator. You apologize to her. He didn't mean that. And we fix it behind the back. So when we do that during our lifetime and then set up something that they'll deal with later or that is unfair, we're ensuring that they won't. We're helping cause those fractures by ignoring the problem because it feels scary to deal with. And the truth about intimacy and the truth about connection in families is you get more of that by going through the hard times. It's why trees have deeper roots in windy areas. So you're just going to have the uncomfortable conversation. If you need a facilitator, that's why people like me exist, but it has to happen.
Mm. It's interesting. One of the things that you just said that I, picked up on, if I were to ask any of my board members, prior to the pandemic in 2020, they're, well, how come you haven't planned anything? They weren't planning on dying. They weren't expecting to die. They were expecting to just go on and not deal with this issue. Since the pandemic, I think the world and the outlook has changed a little bit, and people are realizing their mortality, and they are starting to look at this more and more. Do I want the kids in the business? Do the kids want to be in the business? What business do they want to be in? These are topics that we deal with all the time in the Next Gen group. But as you know, I have 3 adult children, the youngest of which, Jamie, works in the business, and the other 2 have their own pursuits. One is an airline pilot, and the other one is an HR director for a software development company. And I always find in my thinking, how am I going to deal with this going forward? Clearly, only one is interested in the business. Do you find that to be some of the biggest challenges that they face?
Yeah, I had one client who spent his whole life buying out his siblings. And then he went and gave his 6 kids equal shares. And I remember when he told them this in the estate planning meeting that there was literally an uproar. They were all screaming at him. They're like, "Why would you do that?" And he said, "Because I love my kids equally." Now, he wasn't giving them the management control. Those are different things. And the hardest thing for business owners to separate is management and ownership. And minority owners have rights. They're not the rights you think they are. And honestly, ownership decisions are very limited. It's about selling the company. It's about voting in the CEO or voting in the board. And it's about acquisitions, and it's a duty of information. That's about it. Some states have a few more rights than others, but it's about 4 things. So ownership doesn't mean as much as we think it means. It literally means nothing about running the company day to day. But the truth is, Steve, in your given situation, my guess is your business is a bulk of your estate. Usually it is. It's where we pour our heart and our soul. And so if you don't equitably split the business, you're creating an inherent inequity with your kids, which isn't what we tell our kids. We tell them we love them equally. We tell them we're doing everything for them equally. And so this question of what to do with ownership succession as separate from management succession, because they're very separate issues, almost always in every parent's heart of heart, it's equitable ownership, inequitable management control. And having that conversation and putting the right controls in place, like I said, a board of directors, maybe a trust for the stock, maybe it's V voting stock for some people, is very, very important. Because I've never heard a parent say, "Yeah, I want to give one kid something," and it's unfair. Except for in one case. There was actually one client I had that wanted to give one sibling a little less, but the reasoning was is this was a person who had no children, had no intention of having children, and he thought the people who would have children, instead of having a trust where those shares would be reabsorbed by the remaining grandchildren, so he wanted this one child to spend as much money as they wanted, but thought the kids with children deserved more. And interestingly enough, we had a conversation about that estate plan, and what that person said is, "I actually am fine with having a little less, not as much less as you want me to have." And he said, "Why?" He's like, "You're not even a spender." And she said, "You're right, I'm not, but I also want to be the world's best aunt. So I want to spoil my nieces and nephews in a way that makes sense for me too. And having a little more in the state enables me to do that." So he wanted to give her about half as much as the other kids. They settled on about a third less, I believe. And so these are uncomfortable conversations about should it be unequal, should it be equal? But it's really important to know what your kids are capable of and what they also want from this to not make the meaning later. Because if they hadn't had this conversation in life and she'd just read these documents, she might have assumed that she was given less, not because she didn't have kids, but because maybe she was the one that was loved less. And because she didn't have kids, he didn't go to her house for the holidays. He went to the house with the grandkids, right? And you see how that creates a pattern that might feel like you're on the outs.
Yeah, that's actually one of my key theories in life. When my friends say to me, "Well, where are you going to retire to?" And my answer is always, wherever the grandkids are.
That's right.
So I know I'm going through this now with one of my clients. It's a very similar situation. There are 4 children involved. One child and one in-law are involved in the business day to day, and they work well together. They work, good together. And then there's another sibling who couldn't work with the one sibling, and so they gave him something that he liked to do. And so there's a 4th child, and I said, well, what about the 4th child? And he said, I don't have to worry about her because her husband has a very good job and a very good career, and so she's going to get something, but not as much as the other 3 are going to get. And I really dug deep on that with him because I said, you have an issue now. Do you want to have another issue down the road? Because you have these 2 that can't work together and are constantly looking, well, how come that one has more? How come this one is? And it really kind of depends upon how their individual businesses are doing, because they were both given like the same amount, and now they're running their businesses, and they're in different cycles and whatnot. And so I know he's in the midst of trying to deal with this as he's getting older, and he's worked with a couple of attorneys now and estate planners and things of that nature. So it can be very, very daunting. So I know you also do public speaking, and you've done speaking all around the country for various groups and business organizations, and that's how we met. What's your ideal day, though? What is it that you like to do the most? And I realize educating, because you said you were an educator, you were an academic when we were discussing before the show. So I know you like to do that. I know you like to develop curriculum. I know you have a lot of stories and interactions with business owners. But if you had your druthers, what would your ideal day look like?
That's a great question. Yeah, I teach almost every day, so some traditional academic teaching for sure. I like that in the evening, so that's my preference. I would get up, I'd do my workout. I would start the day with some, executive coaching. That's one of my favorite things. They also, as much as I love the family work, you can't stop thinking about a family because there's so many moving pieces. When you're just working with the executive, although the family factors in, it's a little simpler. So some executive coaching before a lunch that's not at my desk would be ideal. And, maybe an hour and a half workshop in the afternoon, and then working with one of my family clients on the larger system challenges. Yes, I've worked with hundreds of families, and large complex families require a certain amount of time and effort. So I try not to stack them back to back whenever possible. And if it's not teaching in the morning, which I meant, or in the evening, then maybe just spending some time with my dog.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
So I know that you mentioned that if you're doing coaching, and I know coaches that have had clients for years on end, but what's the typical engagement when you get involved with a family business and they have, maybe they have one issue, but they might have multiple issues?
Yeah, I love, when we talk about family business consulting, people always ask what it is, and it's all the parts that are your family and emotional, and it's all the parts that are business. I have a business background. So we do small steps at first. We do what's called a discovery. It can take a month or 2 to interview everyone and then give you a report on the kind of work that we do. After that, we sign on for a contract. It's usually no less than 6 months because that's how long it takes to change business things. If it's succession, we're probably looking 9 months. But an average client engagement's about a year and a half, up to 3 years if it's really complicated. But because I'm a coaching lens, even when I'm working with a family, it's building capacity. It's not building um, uh, scope creep. And same thing with coaching. Coaching is closer to 3 months to 9 months for executives. So each one is project based, and you get to choose along the way, and we make sure we're getting to your goals.
Oh, great. Now, I know the first time I saw you, you did about, I guess, a 60 to 90-minute keynote address. Today you did a 3-hour workshop, and we talked about a seminar, which would be like an all-day seminar.
Yeah.
Working with generational businesses, I guess is the way I would put it. And then obviously the coaching. So, if anyone is interested, you can probably Google Natalie, but if not, you can reach out to Compel, and we'll be happy to connect you with Natalie if you want to bring her in to talk to you about either the development of your management team, your coaching some of your senior people, or helping you structure your succession plan for your family-owned business. I know we're going to bring Natalie back multiple times because I already heard from multiple members that we got to bring her back. So we look forward to that. And thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks so much. It was great.